Good afternoon, everybody. Dave DeWalt here. I'm the founder, CEO of Night Dragon. Got to have a cool name for your companies here at RSA, right? Night Dragon's my company. It's an investment and advisory firm. I'm formerly the CEO of Mandiant and FireEye. Prior to that, I was CEO of McAfee. So one or two investigations and things along my career path. I've been in cyber for almost 20 years now. And this is actually marks my 20th RSA. Anybody been here more than 5 times at RSA? You guys been here a few times? Cool. Are the parties getting better? Okay. Can't count anymore, yeah. 20th RSA. I go all the way back to when I was CEO of Documentum, and my company got bought by EMC. A month later, we acquired RSA. And part of the due diligence was to come to the RSA event. Although it was kind of small back then, but it sure has grown. It's been a real treat and a real honor to be a part of the cybersecurity community for 20 years now. Part of my background is really working with government. And I say this with a lot of honor and a lot of respect. Over those 20 years, I've served many different advisory roles on various types of functions. Today, I'm working with these wonderful people I'll introduce in a second, but it's been an important role, in my opinion, public-private partnership for a lot of reasons. Obviously, the threat environment is quite unique. We can talk about that at some point, but we also have a need for government, public coming together with private for so many reasons. We've seen this with the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. We see this with any geopolitical tension that may occur in the world. Private has a big role for that. I've been a huge advocate of that. If you follow me at all, you can see that this has been a life work for me as well. So what a great honor it is to be here. I just want to say thank you for those who've come. And I'd like to introduce Rob Silvers. Why don't you introduce yourself for a minute? I won't do as good a justice if that's okay. And then Heather, yourself too.
Sure thing. Good afternoon, everyone. Rob Silvers, I'm the Undersecretary for Policy at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And our department is a very big place, covering everything from cyber, of course, and our agency CISA, but also counterterrorism, the border, disaster response, U.S. Secret Service, and more. And my job is, as Undersecretary, is to look at our hardest problems and say, here's what we need to do to address them, and here's how we're going to do it, and then to build the teams and move out on those priority areas. And one that has just been increasing in importance is cybersecurity, of course. And really excited to be here today to talk about the Cyber Safety Review Board, a really innovative new thing we've been working on.
Rob didn't have any gray hair when he took that job.
True story.
So now, yeah, all good. And Heather, I know you've been in cyber a long time, Google for many years. Introduce yourself as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Heather Adkins, Vice President Security Engineering at Google. I've been at Google for almost 21 years. In May, it'll be my anniversary. And I've had the distinct pleasure to watch the company grow from a small startup that did search to a company that does self-driving cars. Don't ask me how these two things relate, I don't know. And it's been a real pleasure just to watch the internet grow also. I've been in cyber for about 25 years, before we called it cyber, before there was actually an industry. And I'm really passionate about what we've learned over those 25 years. I think we finally unlocked just how do we solve this cybersecurity thing. And so it's a real pleasure to serve with Rob and our other board members on the CSRB to bring some of these ideas to the forefront and get it done.
Show a couple of your scars, Heather. You have a few in cyber,
Just
I know.
a few, just a few, yeah.
Or are they tattoos now? Yeah, one of the two. She's been through some of the most interesting crises in the world. So somebody with extreme expertise in knowing investigations, partaking in them, and great honor to have you here as well. Why don't we start out? I mean, cyber safety, right, is a huge element of our society now. And just for one set of context for a minute before I ask Rob to explain what the Cyber Safety Review Board is, I've been chairing safety and security for Delta Airlines. I've been on that board for 12 years. And you wonder why they hired a cybersecurity expert on the board 12 years ago. But they did, and it was a real learning for them and for me to be a part of that industry. But we have a lot of parallels in that in the world of transportation, we have the NTSB, and we have a Transportation Safety Board that conducts similar, very different, but similar types of safety incidences that are out there. And I've had to partake in a few over the years, so have some experience from another angle as well. But Rob, why don't you spend a minute, explain what CSRB is, why it was designed, kind of just give a little history here and what it's about from a mission point of view for a second, if you would.
Absolutely. Well, you brought up the National Transportation Safety Board, and when there's an aviation accident or a rail accident in this country, in addition to the company being involved in the response and obviously whatever local officials on the ground of where it happened, there's an independent investigation that happens with a federal agency called the National Transportation Safety Board, and they bring in experts and they do authoritative fact finding. They work with whatever companies and others in the community have the expertise and understand what happened. And then they issue recommendations for the whole aviation community and transportation community, say, here's how we can prevent this from happening again. And it's proven to be a really, really good model for transportation safety. We didn't have anything like that for cybersecurity. When there were big cyber incidents, you'd of course have the victim company involved, you'd have law enforcement or some government agencies involved, but who was really trying to explain to the whole community what happened and then explain to the community, here's how you can learn from it. And that's the model. And so President Biden, when he signed his cybersecurity executive order in 2021, he ordered DHS to stand up the new Cyber Safety Review Board. And it's truly a public-private initiative. Half the members of the CSRB are all the federal leads for cyber. I'm very honored to chair it. And we also have the leads for cyber at the NSA, the FBI, the Defense Department, the Justice Department, and the like. And then half the members are private sector luminaries in cybersecurity. Really honored to work with Heather as the vice chair of the board, and we have really distinguished other private sector members, and it's 50% federal, 50% private sector. So anything the board does is a joint product. And when significant incidents happen, we take a look at them, we find out what happened, and we say here to the community is how we can do better. We're not a regulator, we don't issue penalties or fines. It's all about elevating security for going forward.
How do we learn? How do we get better? I mean, it's really needed in the world of cyber, right?
Yeah.
I mean, thousands of breaches a year, some of which are in our critical infrastructure. If you drew a parallel to the aviation industry, you had the same kind of calamities, there would be, a big problem. And we have a big problem in cyber, so I commend you and as well of all of it. Heather, give your perspective on this from the private side for a minute. Mm-hmm. Why did you join? What do you see coming from Google after almost 21 years now at Google?
Yeah, I think private industry had been dealing with breaches really as a solitary exercise. If your company gets hacked, you deal with it, you clean it up. Breaking down the silos between companies to really study the trends that are happening across the industry, I think is absolutely necessary. What happens to one victim happens to others, happens to the federal government, happens to our partners internationally as well. And I think the benefit here of bringing public and private sector together is the ability to really look at these issues cross-cutting across the industry, so that the learnings that any one individual victim is having doesn't stay behind the scenes on paper, but we're able to elevate the issues that we're seeing. And then also to bring everybody together. I think when we problem solve, we've also been problem solving somewhat in isolation in the private sector at least. And this is an opportunity for us to bring victims to the table, to bring private industry and public sector together and think hard about the solutions. Like, how are we actually going to get ahead of this? I think any of us who've been in cyber for at least 5 years, if not 10, come to RSA and we hear the same stories, and we've been hearing the same stories for a long time. And what we really, really want to do is change the story, right? We want to tell different stories in the future. We want to solve some of the things that have been happening for the last 20, 25 years so that we can take the challenges that are coming next. And there will be more challenges in our future on the digital safety side. So I'm excited, to be able to get together and collaborate with others in the field, and in a safe space as well.
Let's talk about maybe one of the first cases that you all investigated. And for those of you who don't know the words Log4j, I think they're all tattooed on our arms now too.
Yeah.
But over the years, like Heather just alluded, we've seen major calamities in cyberspace. And running McAfee and Mandy and Heather and Rob too, we had a lot of these along the way. We wish we had CSRB back then too. So talk about Log4j, why Log4j for a minute, and then what was the process like, Rob and Heather, that you went through, and ultimately maybe some findings. So let's break that down a little bit. Why Log4j? Why did it rise up at CSRB's level, maybe for those who don't know exactly what Log4j problem was?
I'll start. So as we were standing up the board, Log4j got publicly discovered in December 2021, and we were just like, wow, this is exactly why the CSRB was founded. I mean, this was an open source software vulnerability that affected literally every company in the world. The Log4j was so widely embedded in commercially available software products of all stripes that it really raised the questions of how do we effectively respond to an incident where everybody has to patch everything at the same time, and quickly, and where they're having a hard time even knowing where in their infrastructure it is, because they didn't put Log4j in directly. They bought software packages that incorporated Log4j, and it caused complete pandemonium, honestly, in the information security world. I mean, the CISO community spent the Christmas holiday cleaning up that mess. And we really, it raised questions about the security of the open source software ecosystem, which is so vital and so innovative, but also has really unique security vulnerabilities. I mean, we're talking about volunteers who are maintaining these software libraries that everybody is using, and what kind of security exposure can that cause? So we saw a lot of opportunity to address recommendations there. We saw a lot of recommendations we could make with respect to vulnerability management and how do you know where your assets are and what you have in your system so that you can act quickly. What's the right role for federal agencies like CISA to help support all that? And so we just saw all this opportunity from really a generational type of software vulnerability that was discovered, and everybody just agreed it's something like this that is why the Cyber Safety Review Board was founded.
And to give a little context, maybe Heather can add on to that, because I love your perspective from Google on that. But you know, when you see a vulnerability of that size and scale sort of get discovered, let's just say a clock starts, because we now have almost 3,500 organized attacker groups in the world. For those of you who spend their bedtime reading like Mandiant's reports, they came out with a report last week, 3,500 attacker groups. Last year alone, we added 953 new attacker groups. So in 1 year, 953 net new attacker groups joined the planet in the world of offensive attacking. So this is pretty historic levels. So when a vulnerability like this gets discovered, what does every attacker group do? They start to figure out how to create an exploit. And so clock starts ticking, and we now have a national crisis on our hands potentially as we start to do it. So giving a little context from somebody else, but Heather, add on to that if you would.
Yeah, what we found was really interesting about the vulnerability is that it had been responsibly found and responsibly disclosed to the project. And then somebody noticed it get fixed in the open. So this was one of our findings, is that open source developers are finding bugs and fixing bugs in the open where people can see them. And it was the Minecraft hackers actually that first got their hands on this, not the nation states, thankfully. And you know, that began the clock, if you will. And you know, for companies, what we discovered was happening is they were hearing about the vulnerability, you know, either because their kids play Minecraft or because they read Twitter. And we were, you know, one of the findings was that the community was the first to notice it was being exploited, to put the advice out publicly, and to iterate on that advice. And there was a lot of good advice and a lot of advice that iterated over time. And so one of the big findings we had was there's a real need to have canonical advice where companies can go and get help even before they're ready to patch. That was one of our findings. And I think it sort of underlined the nature of that race when you find out there's an issue and when you find out you can patch. But I think the big challenge that most companies had, whether you're big or small, is just where is Log4j?
It's like, where's Waldo?
Where's Waldo? Yeah.
But Waldo's everywhere.
Waldo's everywhere, yes. So I suppose the question is both simple and not simple. But I think because we found that Log4j was everywhere, there's a reality here that Log4j vulnerable versions of it are going to be around for a long time. And here we are a year later, and I see lots of vendors here at RSA who are trying to solve that problem. I see a lot of software supply chain. How do we get SBOMs everywhere? How do we do secure development? And how do we discover? How do we do asset discovery? So you're seeing some of our findings actually starting to elevate and percolate even into the solutions space, which is great.
Have we added any Minecraft 12-year-olds onto the public safety board?
We're hiring.
Idea, yeah.
We're hiring.
Yeah. This is where we learn our information from now. Yeah. Maybe we should think about that. Yeah. Spend a more minute on the findings, if you would, because I think this is an amazing case that, at least for one person who does a lot of investments and advisory across the system, I mean, this was an epiphany, right, in a lot of ways around our software supply chain. Not just open source and potential accidents, and in some ways, fortunately, this was a bit of an accident with coding as opposed to a malicious SolarWinds-like thing that occurred. Talk a little bit about more of the findings and the epiphany and perhaps some of the best practices and things that could come out of this, and part of how we can educate post this investigation and what we do.
Yeah, I mean, first, one of the key findings by the board was Log4j is not over. This is going to be, and we called it an endemic vulnerability, and that it could be with us. We're going to be reckoning with it for years to come, maybe a decade or longer. And in fact, I actually saw a month or two ago a major security firm put out a report of its incident response services that it provided in 2022, and 11% of its incident response work came out of exploitation of Log4j. I found that completely astonishing. Yeah. In this big world of so many different kinds of malware, so many software vulnerabilities, that you had just one that was accounting for that kind of share should wake everybody up in the room, that it's not like that's something from 2021 and now I'm on to the next, whatever next is hot. CISOs, network defenders need to maintain their vigilance with respect to Log4j. Heather mentioned some of the key recommendations we issued that would be very useful to network defenders with respect to asset discovery, vulnerability management. We also made some major sort of ecosystem recommendations and findings. And I'll just highlight two, and I bet Heather has others. The first was, it was really problematic in our view that you had really well-intentioned volunteer coders who were writing this code, but it had this bad bug. And it really occurred to all the board that we need, as we train the next generation of coders, we need to train them to code securely. And there are computer science programs, whether at four-year universities or in other kinds of courses, where you can get a degree in comp sci, but never have taken a security course. And so one of our recommendations was that any administrators of universities, community colleges, any degree or certification in computer science, there should be a required secure coding component to that coursework. So we're not only writing great code, we're writing secure code as well. So that's sort of like an ecosystem thing for the long run that's really important, and we've gotten great pickup from the academic community in that regard. Another interesting observation we made was with respect to new Chinese government regulations around vulnerability disclosure. So the Chinese government put out regulations that in certain circumstances require those who discover new vulnerabilities to report them very, very quickly to the Chinese government. And then the Chinese government also has authority to order the submitter not to disclose to anyone else. And that was really alarming to us, because you could have a situation where the Chinese government gets notified, wants to use that vulnerability for its own offensive purposes, for espionage or offensive cyber attacks or what have you, and instead of prioritizing it for patching and network defense. Now, what happened in Log4j was there was a large Chinese technology company that we found actually did the right thing, discovered it and reported the vulnerability to Apache, which maintained the open source code in this instance. But then the Chinese government sanctioned that Chinese technology company under sort of murky conditions. And we were really concerned that it could chill the kind of vulnerability disclosure process, the coordinated disclosure process that is so critical to maintaining security in our ecosystem. So that was just another very interesting piece of the board's work.
Yeah, great work. Heather, any comment on that?
Yeah, I think coming back to the software ecosystem, Rob mentioned that the project Log4j, it's part of the Apache Foundation set of projects, and all of you probably interact with Apache-related projects every single day, whether you know it or not. And what we found in speaking with the maintainers of many open source projects is that they are volunteer-based, and they often have varying degrees of support. And we know this from other kind of very famous vulnerabilities, that there's often just one maintainer. It's a part-time job, and it can end up in millions, if not billions, of systems and satellites, and who knows, right? But you as a consumer of this software, so a developer going to incorporate a library or an open source package, you don't actually know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know the health of that project. You don't know the health of the code. And so it's actually difficult for you as a consumer of software to make an informed choice about whether you want to include that. And so we did talk also quite a bit about this, the open source ecosystem and how we can help get better visibility into the health of some of these projects and get them help. There's a lot that private industry can do, that the public sector can do to help developers get training, to help them have a more robust developer ecosystem, and that we all need to invest in our open source developers as well. And I think that's a really important point as we think about the next couple decades of how we're going to use software like this. When the original developers are retired, who's going to maintain it all? And it's important that we be, as a community, thinking through that pretty well. And it ties really closely into the whole tool chain for writing code, packaging it up, pushing it out. How do you let your consumer of software, all of us in this room probably, know what's inside? And so we made also a recommendation that the concept of software bill of materials, which actually was already getting really good traction at the moment, these moments converged. We really want to see that ecosystem mature and develop to be usable, so that we can expand out, we can take this application and expand out everything that went into it and what might be vulnerable. And you can see we work on that for 5-10 years, and we'll have a much healthier ecosystem in terms of knowing how to fix things.
I think we speak in SBOM words instead of saying it all out now. So we've gotten good at
SBOM.
Software bill of materials at this point. Talk a little bit about this first investigation, how the private side collaborated, colluded, cooperated, volunteered. And the reason I say that, over years with the NTSB, I mean, everyone comes together as a village almost immediately on these investigations, right? We all know in the transportation industry, if there's a safety incident, we have to work together to solve it. And it's been institutionalized in all of us in that industry. Cyber's never had this before, and in a way, a lot of the cyber companies kind of sometimes threat intelligence is sort of an economic thing for them too, right? So you had to break down that wall a little bit too to get cooperation, but as I see it, the cooperation was unbelievable. Talk a little bit about that first case, from the collaboration, investigation, the community coming together on this one. if you would.
The collaboration with the private sector was remarkable. We received data, interviews, discussions with 80 companies and security researchers, and others in the space. And so I think one, that shows the breadth of the work. I mean, this isn't about reading, public reports and issuing recommendations from there. I mean, this is authoritative fact finding. And that's part of the value of the board's work. And then the private sector really came to the table in droves, and it was really terrific to see. Now, there were a couple companies that didn't want to participate, but they were far outnumbered by those that were really happy to provide data and information. That included companies that were themselves, experienced the intense incident response and had to do all the work. And then also a lot of cybersecurity companies were really happy to come forward and share aggregated information. They obviously didn't betray any client confidentiality, but they had incredible data and visibility into what happened ecosystem-wide, and they shared really incredible insights. And so really just extraordinary. The work of the board is not only public-private in terms of the membership and any recommendations and the like is put together jointly, but the input comes so much from, we interviewed both federal government agencies that were involved in the response, foreign government cyber agencies to get their perspective, for example, from the UK and Israel, those governments, and we even interviewed a representative of the Chinese government. They agreed to come and speak with the board. Didn't answer all the questions presented, but I think, again, shows the scope of the work.
Yeah, I think we were lucky, fortunate, thoughtful about the first choice of review. We were taking a look at something where the community had already come together. They had come together to share good and bad advice on Twitter, and we're all in the same boat. So everybody was coming to the table with the same set of problems and the same viewpoint. I will also make a special call out to the Apache Software Foundation, who also came to the table. Look, it can be really hard to come and talk about, we had a bug in our code, and that can be really hard. And I think we should give a lot of credit also to the maintainers who stepped forward and said, hey, look, here's what we learned, right? Yep. And so I think as a first review, it was a good one because it showed how the board operates, and we want to be very transparent about that. And secondly, it also showed what the culture of doing these kinds of reviews in a safe way can be. It's not going to be, a congressional panel of people shouting at you. It's really the community coming together to figure out how we solve this.
Let's talk about, I know you have a second investigation. I know you're not through it as of yet, but maybe the choice of the second one, a little bit about the second one, I think is already disclosed, correct? And just what you're doing next as part of the CSRB and the next review and why you've chose this one. Can you say a few words, Rob, on that?
Sure. So for our second review, we're in the middle of reviewing a string of hacks associated with a hacking group called Lapsus and some associated actors. And it's really remarkable just from public reporting. These actors have successfully compromised some of the very biggest, most well-resourced, best defended companies in the world. And it's really like a Fortune 25 type list. And again, I don't want to get too far ahead of where the review currently is, but again, just based on public reporting, it's reported that a number of the actors involved are teenagers living in countries that, it's not Russia, it's not North Korea, it's countries that have law enforcement relationships with the US, and yet they're able to engage in this kind of activity, not on a one-off basis, but just time after time after time on well-defended company after well-defended company. And that really told us, somebody needs to look into this systematically. How is it that a group of teenagers from countries that have relationships and are willing to extradite to us are able to succeed like this again and again and again? We have to get to root cause here and understand what's happening, and then how can network defenders respond to this and prevent themselves from falling prey to the same kind of attack. And so this is a different kind of review than Log4j, which was about software and a vulnerability, regardless of whether a given company was exploited or not, or compromised or not. Here we're really looking at live fire compromises, and but that's what the board is meant to do also. And so I think there's going to be a lot of very valuable, very specific and actionable recommendations for different segments of the cybersecurity community for how to up game based on what we've learned.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've been talking in the industry for a long time. You know, if 16-year-old hackers can do it, imagine what a well-funded hacker could do. And I remember having that conversation in the 90s. We're still having that conversation. So I think, you know, now's the time we really get focused if we want to protect critical infrastructure and, you know, our citizens online. We've really got to get ahead of that question.
Yeah, I can't agree more. You know, I'll come back to this sort of annual report card that I read in earnest. There's two of them I read really closely, sometimes of which they're hundreds of pages long, so you got to have a little patience. One is the mandate report, one's the Verizon report. I really try to study them, having done a lot of this. The mandate report again last week just hit me with another epiphany, particularly as it related to Lapsus too, was the dwell time that we're seeing 10 years later. In 2014, we put out a report and we were watching dwell time. Dwell time is essentially how long are the actors in the network for. And at the very beginning, Heather can attest to this, it was measured in hundreds of days, which talk about a problem, right? If you're giving an attacker hundreds of days to be in your network, you know, it's a pretty long period of time. And we shrank it and shrank it and shrank it, and we're back to 2014's level again. And so, you know, it shows the sophistication of the actors and even, you know, the type of actors who can now get dwell times to the point where we were in 2014. The average is roughly around 14 days now, so it's not hundreds of days, but 14 days in the time of computing is a lifetime too, to be able to move laterally in a network and exfiltrate and create a campaign. So we're in a really interesting era here where going back to the root cause of the actor is really important in my opinion. It's almost like what was the safety incident that actually was on the aircraft, not what the accident was. So in a lot of ways, commending you to go back and look, this particular group, who's somewhat a virtual, loosely coupled organization from countries around the world, like why are they collaborating? How are they collaborating? Where are they coming from? Where are they getting educated? It's fascinating to me to watch that, particularly because we track nation states who are highly funded for many years, but here's one that's very interesting as well. The other stat that I would give you quickly is the 63% of all the breaches last year were third-party found. So another amazingly high stat that we had been reducing. And if you think about all the spending happening in security these days, now a $200 billion a year market, to have 63% of the breaches reported by a third party, not discovered by your own defenses, is another one of those epiphanies, at least for me again, because we have done best efforts as a community in many ways to stack security defense in depth, yet 63% of these are discovered by somebody else, not by the company. So dwell times high, attacker groups high, you know, third party, you know, reporting high, and you know, we have a situation, we have a crisis. And so, you know, an interesting time. Before I let the audience, and maybe you can think of a question or two for us up here if you would like, I'd like to ask a little bit about where we're going with CSRB. Like, just give us a little vision. We learned a lot with Log4j. You're learning a lot with Lapsus, I'm assuming. And what do you want to see moving forward? And you know, from your two seats, I'd like to hear the vision of this. Hopefully, my opinion, this is institutionalized right, we need this. This needs to be a foundation, but your words, please.
Absolutely. Well, you know, this is a greenfield project. I mean, this thing did not exist 2 years ago, right? And so we are always, Heather and I are always talking about how can we further solidify this, grow this, grow this new start. And that we've done a lot already. I mean, we brought on significant permanent staff to support the board's work, have all kinds of technical capability to support it. One thing that we actually rolled out on Monday of this week is the board drafted and approved a legislative proposal, a draft bill that we've now presented to Congress to authorize, for Congress to sort of like formally authorize and make permanent the board's creation, because we did it through executive action. But we think Congress should put its stamp on it and also give us a foundation for more resources, further building out the staff. We've also proposed that the board be given limited subpoena authority. We think it would really be the rare instance where the board would need to use that, but the NTSB does have, it's interesting, the NTSB
We're used to it.
has subpoena authority. It almost never uses it because it doesn't need to, because it gets the cooperation. And likewise, we think based on our track record and the trust we've already established with the community, that we're going to be able to get voluntary collaboration in the vast majority of instances, but we think that we should have the ability as a board to get the information we need to do the important work. And so we are now actively working with Congress towards that end, and the White House and the entire Biden administration has endorsed this bill.
Yeah, and I think anytime you do something for the first time with 15 very opinionated people, and a very opinionated community who's eagerly awaiting, we took a first crack at it and did a great job. We've already made process changes behind the scenes, and to get more efficient, to be able to do bigger things. And so I think also we'll want to watch how the community uses the data we get and put out in the Lapsus report, because I think that will inform us how can we be better helping the community. Is it more reviews, fewer reviews, bigger reviews, smaller reviews? I think we'll want to look at all of that, so that what we're leaving for the next version of the board when our terms are up, that it'll be resilient and permanent and a part of the ecosystem in such a way that once we've solved all of our current problems, we can solve the next generation of problems as well. So looking forward to it.
I've always been a believer, if you've heard me speak for 20 years, I've always talked about someday we're going to have a World Health Organization-like concept in cyber, where the world comes together in a united way to help with cyber health, not just, physical health. And this is a start in a way, give you a vision for the next few years, one man's view, like how do we unite the world around cyber safety? And it's a great start for us. What kind of questions could we have? Yes, sir. Talk louder, I'll repeat it if I
think
can
there's
hear.
microphones too.
Yeah. There you go. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the board and your service. So my question is, your recommendations are recommendations right now, and I know it's for the more than federal government. Is there any plan to make that more prescriptive, like the M2209, M2131 for the federal government, or go back to the frameworks of 800-53 or the CSF, make it more prescriptive, because subjective recommendations sometimes fall apart. Is there any plan for the board to give prescriptive recommendations which become almost controls or even testable?
I'd say the way we approached this with the Log4j report is we knew that there were very prescriptive things that the industry was already ready to move on. And we made very specific recommendations in those cases. And then we could see problems on the horizon for which there wasn't industry consensus, or we didn't have enough studies and research to really know precisely what the answer was. So when you read the Log4j report, you'll find some very prescriptive things. For example, we know SBOM, software bills and materials. This is tried and tested enough that we should get started and iterate. But there are definitely areas where, we had hypotheses that it would be good to tackle that, and we recommended studies. So I think it's good that we have a blend. Yeah. Rob, I don't know if you want to say anything.
For one guy who's not government, I would tell you, and I sit on a lot of public boards, over my career, boy, would I like to see more prescriptive controls in cyber. I really do. I do a lot of time educating boards. I say this publicly a lot. We almost need to have a moment like we had with revenue accounting, and many of you remember this maybe. Enron, WorldCom created Sarbanes-Oxley, and Sarbanes-Oxley got ingrained into everybody's mind on a board and audit committee. Now I know almost everything about MWs and SDs, material weaknesses and significant deficiencies in your accounting models. We know how to create corrective actions, CAMs, and we all get it on boards. And you look at that same parallel in cyber, there's nothing here.
Still too early.
Right, so over time, controls can be good. Prescriptive controls, in my opinion, properly done, not over-regulated, but hygienes that allow us to have cyber responsibility and risk factors managed in a similar way. What would be an MW for cyber? What would be an SD for cyber? How might we remediate that? Kindly and gently at first, but over time, forcing that to be a shields up higher for all of us in the community. So I know we're out of time. I just want to say thank you for everybody who came in, and particularly to Rob and Heather. By the way, thank you for your service. Thank you for the work you're doing, and truly honored. I really believe this administration has made incredible progress with cyber. I'm a huge fan of what has happened between what Rob's work is doing, Jen Easterly work, Ann Newberger's work, Rob Joyce's work, Kemba Walden's work. I mean, I'm inspired by it, 20 years watching it, and I just want to say thank you to all of you. Appreciate it. Keep going. Let's make it happen. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.